recently moved back to Samoa. And I thank beautiful Samoan women for attracting Chinese to come to Samoa, because otherwise I wouldn't be here. When I was living in Japan, I became more aware of how important it is for me to always acknowledge that I'm not just Samoan, I'm Samoan Chinese. That's why this is thirst for information to discover who I am.
Well, the first wave of migration came before the 1900s, and they consisted mainly of the Chinese free settlers. There were no restrictions when they came. Some of them wanted to stay in Samoa after traveling the Pacific. Others wanted to set up businesses. Probably others fell in love with the local girls.
Usually, Chinese are mentioned in Samoan history as this is when they arrived. And then it was like German, New Zealand administration, and then independence. But there's not a lot of materials. And I didn't grow up in an environment where that wasn't really like the sorts of conversations we had at the kitchen table. It was like, how's your homework and what you do at school today. We didn't really think to ask, oh, so how come Grandpa doesn't really speak, that much Samoan? I mean, we realized that he's Chinese.
The second wave of Chinese that came to Samoa, I would describe as the indentured laborers. So these were the Chinese mainly from the southern part of China. By the 1900s, there were a lot of plantations in Samoa, mainly run by the German companies. And the Samoan people did not want to work in the plantations. So these German companies, they brought in the Samoan Islanders mainly. Our Melanesian brothers were brought over. And they also looked at China. And so that's why the Chinese were brought over here. For the free settlers, they came here on their own free will and were not tied by contract to anyone. Whereas the indentured laborers, they came under contract. And conditions of the contracts were very strict. Mainly the Chinese indentured laborers were required to work 9.5 hours a day. Flogging was allowed, and flogging can be for being lazy or for running away or for not bowing down low enough to the European employers.
When the Germans were here, there was a system of race separation. There were the whites, and then there were the half-whites, and then the Samoans, and then the Chinese. And of course, we had our Melanesian brothers.
When the New Zealand administration took over Samoa after the First World War, there were some laws that were passed to try and stop the mingling of the Chinese with the Samoan. And there was even a law that was passed by the New Zealand government which prohibited Chinese men from marrying Samoan girls. The first administrator had said the Chinese should not marry the local girls because that would contaminate the Samoan blood, but it was okay for English men to marry the Samoan girls as they were of Aryan stock. So I guess that's probably one reason why they had passed such a racist legislation.
So it specifically said indentured Chinese laborers, they were prohibited from entering any Samoan whale. If they were caught, they were fined about £5 or something like that, and or go to prison for about 6 weeks and do hard labor. I get a little bit teary when I think of this part of the story. It's how I think some families were split. Like the Chinese who married Samoan women and had families, and so some of them were repatriated back to China. You know, it's like the dawn raids, kind of.
I think that was one sad period in Samoa's history, the forceful repatriation of the Chinese indentured laborers, especially when some of them did not want to go back because some of them have married local girls or they even had children at the time. They were forced to go back to China. One Chinese man I heard had to jump off the boat, swam back to Samoa, and his descendants are still here. Others had to hide in the plantations in the forest to avoid repatriation. When my great-grandfather asked Matafa said, just go and hide. If you're caught later, then I'll try and help. So yeah, so that's what had happened with my great-grandfather. Yeah, luckily he wasn't caught and had a lot of friends.
You can put some shade on Larry's shirt.
My grandfather was working on one of the farms. He was an indentured laborer. And so at the time, my grandmother, she used to go with the women's committee to take the fafanga, you know, so it's basically the food for the supervisors who are supervising the indentured laborers. So the women's committee are like, hey, arure sainga la, olo manuia la, olo lumanai la. And I'm so grateful because, I mean, here I am, like 15 children later. There's no television in those days.
If you look at the Samoan history, over the years, we've accepted intermarriages between us and the Fijians, the Tongans, and other races. And so when the Chinese came along, it was easy for us Samoans because of the inclusiveness of our culture. And I think there were also similarities with the two cultures. You know, respect for your elders, love of food.
People are always like, you know, why does it seem to work, Samoans and Chinese, this relationship? Chinese are very hospitable, Samoans are very hospitable. Chinese are very family-oriented, Samoans are very family-oriented. Chinese look after their elders, Samoans really look after their elders. The majority of our value systems are more similar than they are different. That's what happens when you do cooking shows. I've done a lot.
I've always identified as both. I'd say I'm Samoan, but I have Chinese blood, or I'm Chinese Samoan. I guess we're having the powers that be at the time, you know, with the British, the Germans, and Americans, and having the Chinese being treated as third citizens as such. They kind of band together, you know, like it's like you go anywhere in the world now, you kind of like see a Samoan and you just gravitate towards them, you know? I guess that's the sort of thing that happened. They found a common ground and they gravitated towards each other.
My grandpa, he is a very historical papa. He was the first person to bring susui here, the first Pelawe, the first ever design here in Samoa. It's my Papa Aki. Oh, he loves play playing mahjong, and he loves, you know, that pipe, opium. Oh, they love that. They.
O lo'o wolanga e lo'o kikilo lo ka bai. Ma lo'o kinga e le songa ia piko whaasainga hoi le whapesa ia ia. Ke kori ame.
E masangi ka aloi ko inga. E fo la le si ko inga pele fo le a sainga. E sa masanga fai I falo a tiongo le a mosese. Inga I kaufusi. Masanga ko waba ai ai. Era ko maka I pu le. O le apa ko le ai fai le opianga ko ko.
O ngā sa whai pare ko sa whai pere ngā senga ka ol pai kau ki le pole mele ka ol pai kau po le pere ai.
Ia o le ai.
Ya, ol mea ngā sa whai pere. O masangi mai le ke lo senga ngā I mea ngā pa ko foi mo malolo e whai mea ai kau le longa se kala fa sa mo ngā le fa senga angi ko inga senga.
O longingo a kiongo. O a kiongo a longingo para au a longa fa ai u. O li fu kiong ya o si se la le alungo al mako fa ai u. Le o mako wa longingo para au
Chinese people came in and they stayed here. They stayed here and they married to our people here, and they built their families here, and they stayed with us. And most of them died here. And forever, ever, it's the connection.
Most of these indentured laborers that came over here would use names when translated into English. It would be hard to be translated back into Chinese. So, for example, Phuc would be Phuc, but the first name would not be there. And with the records that they had at the time, they mainly used numbers. Even up to now, even last week, I had another family who came asking me if I can help trace their grandfather who was repatriated to China in the early 1900s. Well, without any records, it's practically impossible. There were a few success stories, though.
To date, it's probably like my best achievement ever to actually make the connection with my grandfather's family. One of my auntie, her husband, kept a photograph that my grandfather had. It had names written. Through her connection, she established a close relationship with people who were able to locate this family in this photograph. At the time, I was living in Tokyo, so I flew over and I met my aunt there. We traveled about 4 hours to where my grandfather's from. And when we got there, one of the men in the photograph greeted us, and I was like, oh my God, he is the person in the photo, because he looked like the person in the photo. You're suddenly immersed in this place that was so foreign yet so familiar, and it was so overwhelming. It was amazing, and I kept thinking, if only my grandfather could just see me now, you know, that sort of feeling. It's like, wow. What got me, though, was the letters. My grandfather had written letters to this family, and they kept all of his letters. On these letters, it had our P.O. box number in Apia. These letters, he's talking about his family in Samoa and how tough life is. And he also talked about one day it was his dream to go back. It was so overwhelming for me because to suddenly make that connection. And it was just the best achievement. Chinese are so connected to the land. You know, they can go afar, you know, but it's so important for them to go back to their roots. They celebrate the dead just as much as how Samoans are. They do this like ceremony where they take, like fake money and pictures of, like fruits or their favorite stuff and they burn it with incense. I actually brought back some sand and I made sure like I sprayed it with mortine and also some bricks from his place in China, and I poured it over his grave. And for me, it was so significant because I'm like, here I am, and in a way, because his blood, flows through my veins, I made that journey back, and I've kind of brought some earth from his homeland and connected him back to his parents. So in a way, for me, that was something special.
Now, the Samoans will very much know that my grandfather's name was Tolupeni, or we call him Tolupeni. And the literal translation is 3 pence. So his restaurant, back in the day, apparently, you can get a pot of tea or pork buns, half moon pie for 3 pence. So I guess he was the original $2 shop guy in Samoa.
If you go down Taufusi Road, that was like Chinatown back in the day. So you'll still have families like the Langwais, the Chan Maos, like they set up shop on Taufusi Road. I mean, that's the end result of someone who came here with nothing. Okay, so this is my grandfather's shop. My mom's oldest sister, she now runs half of the shop. And then my mom's youngest brother also has a shop further back. Georgie's Pizza is now where we used to spend our holidays. That used to be the living room. Yeah. And this is Auntie Moi. It's my mom's oldest sister. So my grandfather built this little empire. My beautiful first cousin, his whole life was dedicated to providing for his Samoan family.
Well, in fact, most of them that came back then are very successful families now. Guys like the Alikis, the Akuis, the Chan Maos. What they used to do back in the day was they used to have this club, and everybody pays a certain amount of money into the club to become a member, or like a la forma, or like, And out of that money, they would buy land for this guy. He starts a business. Now, he's got to pay that loan back into the society, and while the society is still putting money in, then they buy land for this guy. Then they buy a business for that guy. And then all these guys end up with businesses, but they still have to pay into the society. It was a very well-organized association back in the day. They just put their head down, bum up, as they say, and just keep saving, and keep working.
I think I would attribute the success of the Samoan Chinese to various factors. Firstly, the cultural element. Samoan culture being very inclusive and allowing the Chinese to assimilate, which then gave the opportunity to the Chinese to develop and also to start businesses and to receive that protection from the Samoans.
Every time this debate comes up about the old Chinese, I would say that they're not really Chinese. They are Samoans. So for me, what we need to be looking at is the new wave of Chinese.
The Chinese are really invested heavily in the Pacific, in all countries, and they are investing more in the future. And Samoa is always looking for big investors to come here, boost our economy. But we've got to be very careful not with what we want and who we want at the right time.
I think we only have to look at Tonga, where they had experienced difficulties with this new wave of Chinese. We got to bear in mind that the new wave of Chinese are very aggressive with their businesses.
You know, right now it's mainly the retails that is sort of causing a bit of a rift or an uproar by the local businesses, the smaller businesses.
You go now to a lot of villages, you see the small shops that we reserve for the families, and now a lot of those shops are run by the Chinese. So that is a real concern, and we keep seeing that over and over again. And we've had some villages basically stand up and said, look, we're not going to have any more of this. We're going to reserve these shops for our local people. So that's the kind of reaction that we've had.
So we're trying to encourage foreign investors to come here, but we don't want them to do that at the expense of our local people. But then there are some loopholes that we are looking at now.
We passed the law restricting foreigners from operating retail shops. But the Chinese that have come in, the new wave, they would marry, for example, marry local Samoan girls to enable them to set up retail shops.
So we've got to try and really look at those legislation to make sure that the protection of our local businesses is continuous, that we don't encourage any more investors in the retail sector. We've got enough. We want constructions and hotel builders.
I mean, competition is always good, but adding 10 or 20 extra companies that are going to undercut our already tight market isn't helping our economy. In fact, what it'll do is it might drive some of us contractors out of business, and whether we leave the country or maybe we'll come to New Zealand and pick apples, I don't know, find another way. We can't compete.
We've got a government at the moment who's pretty desperate in terms of money, who are not exactly the best in terms of being transparent and accountable in terms of how the money is spent.
We need to stop it now. They don't give a hoot as to who they're trampling on or who they're running over. They're just driving for the business. But going back to the old school, there was the harmonious gel. But back then, I suppose it was the growth of Samoa that needed it. It needed to happen that way. We still need to grow, but not this way. There's too much influx right now.
We need to look at what's happening to our customary land. We need to look at what's happening to our culture. We need to look at what's happening to our language. And we talk a lot about the dragon coming in, and I think that's all part of it. It comes down to a new wave of colonialism that's coming through. We've been independent now for 55 years. The question we really need to ask ourselves is, sit back now and look back at how far we've come. Where exactly are we?
We cannot avoid being part of globalization. We're there. It's kind of upsetting for me when I hear negative comments towards the new migration of Chinese, because I put myself into my grandfather's shoes and I imagine, what would he say? Because, how is he different from these Chinese? I'm going to put it bluntly. There's an air of racism towards the new Chinese, and that's not who we are. That's not who Samoans are.
What is going on? We're looking another 20 years ahead. What's going to happen?
Or what they've left behind for us, our forefathers, our Chinese fathers, they've come in and actually integrated into our Samoan society, into our Samoa, Olanga Samoa. We've learned the best out of both worlds, our whāaloalo and our the way that we are in the Samoans, and in the hardworking and I guess the business news of the Chinese.
we're a product of being Samoan as well as being Chinese. And I think that's important for us to acknowledge that Samoan Chinese exist within Samoan culture. In the same way that so many people acknowledge Apakasi. For every Samoan who has Chinese blood, it's so important for us to acknowledge that. And I think it's even more important for us to start telling this story, start telling this history. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's time for us to celebrate it because it's amazing. I mean, it's Chinese, Samoans come together and it's like fireworks.